travel the world with torture equipment, as you do. So what, rather than giving a formal lecture or reading a chapter or something like that, what I've done is I've selected some images that appear in the book, and we're just going to kind of talk them through. And what I'm basically doing here is a sort of chronology of torture methodology through the centuries and around the world. Though most of this is European history, we had used the other parts of the world as a separate part of the book, so it's not in here. Also, for those of you who have not read the book, going through this book feels a little bit like going through a torture museum. However, what we were trying to do is answer one very specific question with this material. And that is that we have known since the ancient world, ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, not classical Greece, ancient Greece, it has been well understood that with the right application of torture, you can get anyone to say anything you want. You want to get somebody to confess to being a giant inflatable chicken, you will find the right torture that makes that happen. Whether it's inflicted on them or someone they love, you will find the right torture. That doesn't make that true. It doesn't mean they're actually a giant inflatable chicken. It means you got them to say what you wanted them to say. So it has been understood for several millennia that as a quest for truth, torture is useless in a legal context. It doesn't elicit truth. Now, the Romans disagreed with this, ancient Rome. They thought the opposite. They thought, no, we have to torture you because there gets to be a point during torture at which point you are incapable of lying. Therefore, if you're still saying the same thing you told us at the beginning, then we will then believe you. But I confessed, I murdered him. Yeah, but we're not sure. We're going to torture you for a while until you confess again. You know. So, if it's not a legal quest for truth, why has every culture that has ever existed on this planet had some variation on torture? And of course, it takes pretty much the entire book to answer that question. Why do humans do this to humans? But what you're interested in is how, more so than the why. But as we go through this, do consider the why, because that is the important question, the relevant question. So what we have here is an ancient Egyptian wall painting of a flogging taking place. That is actually a flogging. It's uncertain whether this chap here on the right is pleading for clemency or somehow helping. We've never been sure. We see an Assyrian version of flogging and flaying. You can see that the chaps down in the bottom left are staked out on the ground, and the guys bending over them are using knives to cut down their spine to peel their skin away. But we don't see the actual peeling away. We do see the spinal cord attached to the head trophies that are being carried away by the victors. This sort of image was very, very important for propaganda, showing the severe consequences for opposing Assyrian might and serving as a warning to neighboring kingdoms. Swimming. This image, albeit depicting a late medieval scene, shows the sort of swimming that is described very thoroughly in Hammurabi's code. The accused is bound hand and foot and thrown into the river. If they successfully manage to cross the open expanse of deep water and somehow crawl out the opposite bank, they are deemed innocent. If they drowned, as most surely did, then they were righteously found guilty. Crucifixion. I think it would be fair to say that everybody, certainly in the Western world, is familiar with the concept of crucifixion. There were varying methods of crucifixion which could be employed depending on how long the executioners intended to prolong the agony. Condemned criminals could be tied to a cross, nailed to the cross, or both. They could be given a platform on which to stand or not. They could be whipped, cut, etc. If one is simply staked out to die of exposure and suffocation, it will take far longer than if one is beaten and flogged and stabbed and dying of blood loss. Sawing in half. In this image, the figure labeled B is being sawn in half. Little explanation is really necessary here to convey quite how agonizing and slow this would have been. Obviously, this is a death sentence, but even once separated from his lower half, like some horrid, grisly, ancient magician's trick, he would still have lived for a considerable amount of time until he eventually died of blood loss, though he would have been coming in and out of shock. Meanwhile, the figure labeled A is about to receive a comparatively merciful sentence of decapitation. Breaking on the wheel. You've heard of this? Yes? This method of torture and execution took many forms. Sometimes the victims were staked out on the ground and a large wheel would be used to smash each of their limbs and joints, including the hips and shoulders. In other cases, the victim was tied upon a wheel and the executioner would use bars, clubs, or hammers to accomplish the same result. The idea was to break all of the bones in the body without breaking the skin or causing any other lethal injury. In either case, the shattered limbs of the victim were then usually sort of laced through the spokes of the wheel, and they were then mounted on a pole and displayed to the populace, where they would slowly and agonizingly die of hunger, thirst, and exposure, and presumably internal bleeding. So they ended up this big kind of cephalopod-type noodly creature once all their bones were broken, of course. This is a standard pillory. Most of you are familiar with the idea behind this device, but these are all still ancient world tortures, even though some of these images are more modern. Of course, once the victim is imprisoned in this, they could not protect or defend themselves against any assault, thrown objects, or molestations by the jeering populace of the city. So this is a different type. This is one of the early types of shame punishments, where you are displayed rather than injured. We'll come back to that. Anybody know what this is?
Bull?
Yes, the bronze bull or the brazen bull. What we witness here, you can kind of make out. I'm sorry it's so small. They didn't have the nice projection screen they promised. This unfortunate victim is being stuffed within the brazen bull, and a great fire is being lit beneath. This would, of course, function much like a cast bronze oven, and would quickly become unbearably hot to the touch. The howls and screams of the roasting culprit could be heard to issue forth from the mouth and nose of the bull, like snorts and grunts to the amusement of the torturers and the assembled court. I don't have it in these notes, but apparently the guy who came up with this idea and built the first brazen bull and brought it to the king said, "What an interesting idea. I wonder if it works. Jump inside." He then roasted the guy who built it and said, "Yep, it works, and now I don't have to pay for it." Branding. Almost goes without saying. But this is an example of a branding iron of the type which would have been used on Spartan males found guilty of what they called being dedicated bachelors, as in spending too much time with the men. While we do not have an actual depiction of a Pega, which was the first version of the Iron Maiden, this image of the Iron Maiden of Nuremberg should serve to illustrate the dangerous result of her cold embrace. There were various versions of this device, some of which were designed to be lethal, some of which intended to be merely injurious. There is a lot of debate as to whether or not these ever actually existed. They certainly appear in folklore and in legends, but the earliest depiction we have of one is actually 19th century, that's the Nuremberg, and it seems to have been a romanticized version of a torture device, as alluded to in the ancient text. Flails and flogging. I'm going to come back to lots of flails and flogging, so, but you'll notice a couple of things here. the man is being flogged by two other men using what appear to be knotted ropes, or perhaps chains with weights. To their right, a victim is having molten lead dripped onto his skin of his back, while in the background, we see a man being lowered into a hole for some unknown reason, and another man is on fire while being beaten with a club. So, a Saturday night. This is the torture of the pulley. On the right-hand side of the woodcut, we can see the application of the torture, which was also known as squassation, of all strange words. The weights attached to his ankles serving to further dislocate his shoulders. By the way, in case you can't tell from the image, the hands are bound behind the back before you are suspended from your wrists, and then weights added to your ankles. On the left side of the image, another man is having his armpits burned with a torch, despite the fact that the rendering makes it appear somewhat more like a feather duster. And in the background, a criminal is having his hand chopped off or broken. Note the clerk judiciously taking note of any utterance made by the victim on the pulley while the torturer asks demanding questions. Which brings me to the whole nature of interrogation. You've heard of giving somebody the third degree, right? There are, in the English-speaking world, there are 3 degrees of torture. There's torture in there's the question of the first degree, the second degree, and the third degree. The first degree is, tell us what we want to know, we know you did it, you're a bad man. Confess or we're going to hurt you. If you do not cooperate, torture. Question in the second degree is, all right, confess or we're going to use that on you. We show you the instruments of your destruction and how they work. We are going to use this and we're going to cut out your eyes. Torture in the third degree is the actual application of that torture and in the inflicting of pain to coerce cooperation. In the French world, French-speaking countries, they only divided in based on the inquisitorial, the Spanish Inquisition line, of the question ordinaire and the question extraordinaire. As in, we ask you and then we hurt you. They don't bother showing you first. Another version of crucifixion. Why did I put this one? I don't know. This doesn't look all that bad at first, except this is a bath and shower with boiling oil. This comes from Fox's Book of Martyrs. And in this image we can see 2 early Christian martyrs meeting their deaths by boiling oil. It shows how they were not only forced to suffer a bath of boiling oil by being immersed in it, but were also showered with it simultaneously, adding to the what must have been unimaginable torment. I mean, you've all tried to fry things at the stove. Ah, that's hot. Yeah, that's hot. That's really hot. We're now getting into the medieval world. These are another version of the stocks. Notice they only had room for 3 hands and 2 feet. So the guy on the left is also wearing chains. If you do get locked into something like this with someone, you hope that they're good company. I don't know. I know, it's weird. Why would you ever need a 3-handed stock? I don't know. This is it's really hard to make out there, but this is a version of a ducking stool. Whether it was intended to restrain a victim whilst plunging them beneath the surface of a lake or river, or was intended to hold them aloft and captive for public display and ridicule is uncertain. It is likely that it probably served both purposes. This particular example is in the Museum of Torture in San Gimignano in Italy. They're very rare, but you can see from the shadow, better than the photo, that the seat of this is just a gridiron of metal. So certainly if they were held up, pokey things, burny things, all kinds of things could be applied even through the chair. I don't have to explain that, do I? That one, however, I do. All right. The last one was obviously a block and axe for beheading. This is something different. This is called a Fallbrett. This is also for beheading. This is the German version. Beheading was an easy death if carried out with skill. It was quick. And as such was reserved for noblemen. Plebeians tended to be executed by slower, more painful means, such as slow hanging. This device, known as the Fallbrett, literally falling board, was an ancestor of the guillotine. But unlike its later French descendant, the Fallbrett would not remove the head in a single swift stroke, but rather, there's no blade on this. The wooden edge on the back of your neck would be hammered through your neck as it ripped and chewed its way through the flesh and vertebra under the impact of the sledgehammer. And that sledgehammer, by the way, is about this big, having seen this as in the head, it's big. But presumably the first hit would break your neck, which of course is going to paralyze you and prevent you screaming or squiggling too much, but that's not necessarily going to kill you, right? I don't know. I haven't tried this. Imagine I'm a historian, not a sadist, right?
They're not mutually exclusive.
True. This is another form of swimming where the guy's been basically hog-tied. Baker's punishment cart. This is an example of a baker's cart. There were many variations on this punishment. A baker, having been found guilty of selling underweight loaves of bread or of weighting his loaves with the inclusion of sawdust, etc. This is underweight according to the Baker's Guild regulations. Would be chained to this cart, filled with heavy weights, and be paraded through the streets with a loaf of bread around his neck. Baker's Guild ordinances tried to mandate against such mistakes, and frequently, in an effort to avoid this outcome, even accidentally, we find that the bakers would give an extra loaf of bread away for free with every dozen purchased, hence the baker's dozen. So that they didn't, ooh, it was underweight, here's an extra one. This is kind of, can you make that out at all? What we see here is hanging, drawing, and quartering. We see an image of three poor souls being hanged, drawn, and quartered. On the right, we see the hanging, though he will be soon cut down while he's still alive. Then the drawing out of the entrails, evisceration, and castration is shown centered. This would be followed by decapitation and then the quartering of the body into segments, which would be boiled in tar for preservation, which is, we see on the left, they're boiling the quarters. And these would be then displayed in different parts of the kingdom as a warning to others. Note how the executioner with the knife holds up the heart of the victim for the approval and satisfaction of the assembled crowd. This is a punishment that throughout European history was reserved for those accused of treason. It was a crime against the state. And by not just disemboweling you, but castrating you, they say, treason shall not propagate in the kingdom. And they cut out the heart of the traitor and say, behold, this is the heart of the traitor, etc., etc. But then, for anybody that wasn't able to make it that day, they send the parts to various places. Pressing. This image shows the process of pressing. Pien et forte and dur is the actual name. But does little to convey the true agony of the experience. The victim here seems almost relaxed, but in reality, as more and more weight is added, it becomes increasingly difficult to breathe. Eventually, the rib cage will collapse and the lungs will be compressed, resulting in slow suffocation. Many of you are probably familiar with the story of Giles Corey. Mm-hmm. And like, yeah, we've all been to Salem. We'll come to that, but he's not medieval. We'll come to that. Oh, here's the Fallbrett being used. Yeah. Heading machine. There's another version of the Fallbrett. The guy with the hammer looks happy, yeah. He's getting well paid for this.
He's on the right side.
This is from a Saxon manuscript, late Anglo-Saxon manuscript, of flogging with thorns. And this is from the Harleian manuscript, 603. Everybody cares. More branding in the Middle Ages as well. Not a surprise. Do I need to say what it is you're seeing? I think I did. It's called suspension. It's a version of squassation, except it's not designed to dislocate your shoulders. This is a detail from a Dutch engraving about 1590, one in a series of 53 showing the massacre of the Protestant citizens of Antwerp by the Spanish on the 5th of November 1576. Here we see 3 victims being tortured by suspension. The male is being suspended by his genitalia, the female by her breasts, and the man in the background by his wrists. We do not think anything further needs to be said here to convey the agony of the victims, which is not otherwise clear in the image, except it's not a very clear image for you guys. I've got it here. It's scary. This is what is referred to as a JAG, J-A-G-G-S, JAGs. This device, once locked about a victim's neck, would tether them to a wall post or similar fixed objects, whether publicly, such as within a church or town square, or privately, such as within a prison or a donjon. It was a cruel and merciless form of restraint, which would frequently be used in conjunction with other additional tortures or torments. The main problem with this is not the constraint itself, is that you have to stand there for a week. Yeah, when you get tired, you know, and you try to sleep, it chokes you. So it's an endurance torture. This is the poorhouse basket. This image shows the punishment of women in a poorhouse who were found to be too lazy. It is similar to the punishment of the chucking stool in that the only real tortures endured by these women are the result of their isolation and exposure to public ridicule. In the case of the chucking stool, this might be in a public market square, whereas here is in the communal dining hall of the workhouse. Anybody know what that's called?
Scold's bridle.
Scold's bridle, which is one of a variety of head restraints in the category of brank. We'll come to some of the branks a bit later, I think. This is, there's a metal, like, tongue or mouthpiece that goes into the mouth when this is locked on, and it presses down on the tongue, and there's usually little barbs on that. This would prevent any verbal communication whatsoever, not to mention the inability of eating or drinking. And it was a common punishment for shrewish or nagging women throughout Europe from the 16th to 18th centuries. From the Cotton manuscript, this is another version of Saxon whipping and branding. He's a very unhappy chap. But the guy on the far left is just jaunty in his flogging. The pointy hat. Hanging in chains or hanging in irons. These 3 cages, hanging ever since the early 1500s, remain from the apse of the Cathedral of Munster in Germany. They're still there. It was within these cages that wrongdoers would be left to die of starvation, dehydration, and exposure for their perceived crimes. Their public display would have served as a warning to other members of the populace, and it would also serve to underline the authority, control, and power of the church and city government and over the citizens of the city. This is the first, the Roman Inquisition favored burning off the tongue and lips of the dissented with a red-hot iron. This scene from Johann Koppenberg's The Mirror de la Tyrannie Espagnole perpétrée aux Indes Occidentales, the mirror of Spanish tyranny perpetrated against the Indians in an effort to Christianize them, shows a collection of heretics being burned together in a great, no it doesn't, that's that. That's that. being burned together in a great conflagration. Remember that this was believed by the executors to be a charitable act of redemption and salvation imposed upon the perceived heathens. It is always worth remembering that we cannot, when approaching any historical subject, judge the people of the past by our modern views, by our morality, ethics, sense of world, tolerance for other faiths and religions, etc., etc., etc. That's us. Then, it was a fact that the sun went around the earth, not the other way around. Until that idea had changed, that was fact. We now know it differently. When they burned people alive, especially heretics, whether we're talking about witches, whether we're talking about heretical preachers, Cathars, Albigensians, doesn't matter, pick one. There were lots. They did not see burning somebody alive at the stake the way we would. We would see it as this really cruel, horrible, drawn-out, agonizing, slow death. If they wanted to kill them, they could take a knife and put it in their heart and they would be dead, and they didn't need to do the burning at the stake, right? But when you read the court records and you read the first-hand accounts, so much of it talks about redemption in that moment. And it seems clear as you get deeper into it that they believed that this was a merciful act, that this slow, agonizing death was to help them. The idea being that as heathens, as heretics, as witches, whatever, they were undoubtedly going to go to the hell that the persecutors believed in. The only way they could possibly save these people from hell is to give them a taste of the fires of hell, to buy them a chance out of the purgatory idea, that maybe if they suffered enough before they died, that God would look favorably on them, thinking they had already paid for their sins. That was the rationale. So a lot of people gathering to watch this are not seeing, I'm sure some were, but a lot of them were not seeing horrible, slow, gruesome, grisly execution. But aren't we all good society people for doing this, right?
Well, wasn't the in many of these tortures if you confessed, if you confessed your sins or your crimes, whatever, they would stop the torture and possibly still kill
And
you.
just kill you, yeah.
But it would be a merciful death.
You could buy yourself a quicker death, yes. Which brings us back to our first question: why torture someone? So you're torturing me, or I'm torturing you, or something, and you want me to say something, and I say it so that you'll kill me quickly. How does that help you? You're going to kill me anyway. In the end, we realize it's actually remarkably insidious. Now's a good time to talk about this, because we're looking at thumb screws. So, excellent. Yeah, that's not to scale, by the way. They're not giant thumbs. Those are thumb screws. And I don't know if you've ever put your thumb in a vise, because everybody does that, right? Just me. It's not just me. It's just me. No. The question is, why do humans torture each other? And it has to do with how societies work, and not about the individuals who are doing this. Obviously, it has to be somebody's job to employ the torture. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, that Zeb is running the country that you're all part of.
Oh, I get to be on top this time.
Sort of. That he's the ruler, the king, the magistrate, he's in charge, right? He's in charge because all of you put him in charge. All of you agree he's in charge. That's why he's in charge, right? And Zeb has said to all of you, the reason you need me and that you can't just govern yourselves, that would be preposterous. What are we, ancient Greece? No, you can't do that. No, you need me to protect you from the invisible evil. Witches, heretics, foreigners, communists, terrorists. Name something from history that, oh no, we need help. You have to protect us from this. Sorry?
The commies.
Yeah. Foreigners. Zeb, he has accused me of witchcraft, right? I'm not a witch. I'm not, no, but, all right, you got me. And he's going to torture me until I say I'm a witch. Like, well, you don't have to torture me, I'll tell you right now. I'm a witch, go ahead and kill me, right? But from his perspective, no, that's not good enough. Because if I kill you as a witch, then the invisible evil is gone. I'm going to torture you until you tell me the names of everyone in your coven, as evidence of the invisible evil that I can put in front of all these people so they will keep me in charge. Right? This has been the kind of model that has existed from certainly classical Greece and classical Rome, pretty much up through now. Right? He doesn't, if I can confess to my crime, but that's not going to help me. I need to give him evidence that he can use so you keep him in power. Right? So, in order to get that evidence from me, he needs to come up with lots of new and various scary things. The Big Book of Pain is predominantly about the application of torture. Most of the execution methods we've saved for the Big Book of Death, which hasn't come out yet. We're working on it. This is a variation on the boot. It's laying on its side at the moment. That's like a curly part on top of the toe with the bell, because it has to have a bell. This would be tightened onto the foot. You can see at the back, it's not a great photo, but at the back there's like a ratchet mechanism, and it locks onto your heel and then tightens tighter and tighter and tighter, pushing your toes into the boot, the metal boot. Yeah. Some devices ground the bones together laterally, like from the sides. Others were designed for breaking each bone in turn, one at a time, vertically. This contraption applied increasing amounts of pressure linearly from the heel, crushing the bones, first the bones in the toes, and then further application would shatter the metatarsals in the feet. Archbishop Grandier. Is that his name familiar? Archbishop Grandier? No? Ken Russell's The Devils? Oliver Reed? Any of you ever heard of Oliver Reed?
Oliver Reed.
All right, Oliver Reed. Well, yeah. There's a fantastic. Ken Russell's a bit of a kook as a director, but he's done some interesting historical subjects. There is a film I highly recommend you check out called The Devils, where Oliver Reed plays Archbishop Grandier, who was accused of witchcraft by some nuns who were in love with him, played by Vanessa Redgrave. It is remarkably well done, and he suffers the torture of the boot. Has all of his bones in his feet crushed. It was a common torture for the Inquisition, which was not allowed to draw blood. They could not violate God's creation by piercing the skin. They could, however, drown you, crush your bones, all kinds of things, dislocate all your joints, as long as they weren't cutting you up. Then they would burn. Actually, they weren't. The Spanish Inquisition argues to this day that they never killed anybody, which is technically true, because the church did not have the authority to execute. They were turned over to the state for execution. They were found guilty and then turned over to the civil authorities, because that is not the work of God. The rack. I took this photo in Prague, the torture museum in the Czech Republic there. The victim obviously laid out on their back on the bed, and their ankles locked into the restraints, while the hands would be stretched up over the head. and attached to the ropes on the windlass. Spiked rollers would penetrate along the length of the spine and lower back, augmenting the agony of having the wrists, elbows, and shoulders, knees, hips, and ankles systematically dislocated before the separation of the vertebra of the spine. However, few victims held out long enough for it to reach that stage. It rarely made it to actually separating the spine. Actually, we tested this, not this particular one, but there was a program we did for Discovery Channel called Ancient Discoveries. It still runs. They do lots of like Greek warships. And we're testing ancient things, and we built and tested a rack in a ancient torture device episode, and it was a very interesting experiment because we used pig's legs as analogous to a human leg, specifically the knee joint, and we were racking it and racking it and racking it and racking it, and it popped, and finally went, and we went and looked at it and realized that it didn't do what we thought it was going to do. We expected the knee to come apart, but the ligaments ended up being stronger than the bone itself, and actually the bones ripped. The bones ripped apart before, it dislocated the joint, of course, and it would have been very, very painful, but the knee did not separate at all.
Before, when you said the victims didn't last that long,
Yeah.
you mean they spoke or they died?
Good question. What I meant was we didn't find, obviously if you take the process far enough, after all of the limbs are dislocated,
No,
then it
but
would
you
start on
said
the spine.
back when they were actually using it.
Right. What I meant in that is we didn't find any record of anybody's spine being affected, that their arms and legs, yes, but nobody actually, at least there isn't any written record that we've been able to come up with, that they survived the arm and leg dislocation and continued until they were 6 inches taller or something. There's a very famous piece in the archive at the Tower of London of the interrogation of Guido Fawkes, Guy Fawkes, Gunpowder Plot. Yeah. Oliver Reed, Guy Fawkes, Guy. And he was never played by Oliver Reed that I know of. They have comparisons of his signature prior to the Gunpowder Plot, and then his signature on his confession after being racked. And you need to see these side by side. In fact, I think I have them in this book somewhere. But they're not in these photos, I don't think. And it is just, you can tell that he can't control anything. Vaguely looks like a signature. Another version of breaking on the wheel. You can see the guys are noodled on the top, woven through, while the guy on the ground is just being smashed with a big wheel. Presumably, he will get there too. I do find the presence of that little broad axe quite curious, just there by his right knee. It looks like, I don't know, he might get off easier. Who knows? Impaling. Yeah, this is one example of impaling. Again, that program that I was working on tried to make the claim, I disagreed with this vociferously, but they tried to make the claim that it was possible to pass a stake from going up from the rectum out through the mouth and avoid all major organs so that they died of exposure.
No way.
And I thought, no, there's too much. I mean, that's possible, yeah, if you're an impaling surgical wizard. That's not, I don't see that as a common place. I do think it's interesting that the legs are all hanging in the tree in the background, having been chopped off of others. This is an example of a pillory. This is a Swiss pillory, as opposed to the stocking pillory with your head and hands. The result is the same. Note how the figures on the right-hand side of the image are selecting stones to throw at the culprit. And while the image does not show his wrist bound and thereby incapable of self-defense, it appears as though the entire pillory is designed to spin, which may make for an additional sport for the outraged public. Yeah, another breaking in the wheel. Oh, torture room. At the Gravenog, you can see various instruments of torture. You get better images of them later. Anyone know what this is?
Candelabra?
Nope. This is a penance rosary. It's a sort of rosary as worn by penitents and recalcitrant sinners, whether voluntarily adorned as a demonstration of faith or prescribed as penance for some perceived sin. This would have been worn while on pilgrimage or in a religious procession. Note the spiked chain which would have supported its weight around the neck of the device.
But those are candles?
Yeah, they were candles.
Are they,
They're on your chest.
and lit?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you were bad. You got off easy, though, compared to this one. Here we see, heretics being executed as part of an auto de fe by the Spanish Inquisition. Two naked men supported on iron spikes have been or are about to be garroted, while two other heretics wearing robes and hats which indicate their offenses are led away for their own executions or punishments. There's a bunch of Inquisition tortures. Go back to some of these. Everybody knows the pear of anguish. Yeah, every program I end up doing on torture, whether it's one that I'm writing or I get brought in as a talking head or something, they all want to talk about the pear of anguish. I don't know, people seem to think it might be fun. Let me just read what caption we wrote. Without going into too much graphic detail, these devices were inserted into the mouth, vagina, or anus and then opened wider and wider and wider to stretch and tear the tissues, or in the case of the mouth, breaking the teeth and jaw, and biting through the upper palate. Found out. We have inspected several examples of this type, and all have invariably been extremely well made and almost artistic in their construction. These are not mere implements of pain from some dark age torture chamber. The individuals who had these constructed were men who took pride and pleasure in inflicting torture upon their victims. They're all remarkably artistic, which always surprises me. I mean, who was going to see this? And yet the craftsmen who made it went to, we have some very elaborate versions of it. Again,
Well, just mechanically, it's fairly sophisticated.
mechanically it is sophisticated, working on the same principle as the water screw, basically. But it's the ornament, it's the fact that they're often like engraved with pastoral scenes. And who is going to see this? That cares what you engrave on this. This is sometimes referred to as an Inquisition chair, sometimes as a witch's chair, or an interrogation chair, or even simply the throne. Its function should be fairly clear from all the spikes. Basically, you put somebody in this before you do other things to them. However, in this particular case, note the spiked board that crushes your shins as you clamp it tighter and tighter, which is at its tightest position there. There's also a board on top of the thighs that is covered in spikes and clamps down and pushing you tighter into the seat. Though the strap across the chest is just a leather strap, go figure.
They didn't want something, getting in the way of other stuff that you probably.
No, wouldn't want that. Okay. Here we have a funnel. Here we see two men being racked. One of them is being racked by the ladder, which we'll discuss later. And the other is being racked on a table while being subjected to the torture of the funnel. Of all the implements of torture in this book, None of them is more commonplace than the funnel. Its use, however, was devious. See, the main body of the text, oh, sorry. You can't read the main body of the text. So basically, yeah, the idea was similar to, what do they call it, waterboarding? The torture of the funnel would be, they would, in the first instance, they would just pour gallons and gallons, gallons, gallons of water down this funnel, which would either have to come out your nose or you'd have to swallow it. Then once your stomach was full and distended, they would beat your stomach with big pieces of wood or iron rods. You'd basically choke. Another version of this involved having a cloth rag of some sort forced into the mouth and down the throat, and then the funnel applied so that it would swell up, and you'd get this suffocating sensation. And very much like waterboarding, you give them the sensation of drowning. This was an Inquisition torture. Again, remember, they can't hurt them for real. They have to hurt them for real. So they wanted them to think they were dying and thereby get their confession of who are the other members of the coven, effectively. Yeah, another version of squassation, the torture of the pulley. That's a stone weight. That's a big stone weight. Yeah. But that stone weight's about this big. So I don't know if you're supposed to be like an anchor that you get tethered to, or locked on like a short chain, you have to carry it around with you, I don't know. This is the Spanish execution by garrote. And here the heretics in the white robes, they're obviously in a chair. Rope is around the neck, goes behind the chair to them, and then that is cranked tighter and tighter until they strangulate. There were other versions of this that the back of the chair had a big long spike, and as it tightened, it would pull you back onto the spike, thereby impaling your brain. There were various versions that are found. What's going on here? Oh, this is not a buffet, obviously. You see lots of dismembering and crucifying, and then being burned. Right? Their arms are chopped off, they're crucified without arms, and then set on fire. Just to be sure. This is a mass burning. This woodcut actually depicts the burning of 23 Jews convicted of the murder of Christian children for the Passover rites, a charge trumped up against Jewish communities all over Europe and always proved with the methods that were applied to witchcraft and heresy trials. Once the torturers elicited the confession they required, that confession was used as proof for the condemnation of the others. This one is in Holland, I believe. Oh, jeez. Yeah, I did this in a program too. The guy on the far left is enduring the torture of the Brodequin. The Brodequin was used to torture Francois Rabelais, who had attempted to assassinate Henri Cotte in France. In any case, the Brodequin is basically a very strong wooden frame that is locked around the legs with the legs close together, and then tightened and tightened and tightened until it can't be tightened anymore, and then large wedges driven in with a mallet, in this case vertically from the knee down to the ankle. In other cases they would be horizontal, and you'd start at the ankle bone, then a knee bone, then some shins, and then back, and then you'd start on the feet. And obviously as the wedge is driven through, all the bones are breaking, and it's fairly slow and horrible. This is a finger pillory, known as the Pillywinks. This one is in a church in Aspey-de-la-Jus in Leicester, England. And it still exists. If you've been bad, they would lock your finger in. Anyone?
The bell?
The drunkard's cloak. It's a species of pillory inflicted, for the most part, on chronic drunkards who were exposed to public ridicule in this fashion. This is the drunkard's cloak. Would take one of two primary forms. Those closed on the bottom with the victim immersed in feces and urine, or merely putrid water, or else open, such as this, so the victim could walk around and be led about town with the enormous, very painful weight on his shoulders. This reminds me a lot of a Chinese torture known as the Kang, which was very much like the stock and pillory, but you had to wear it. And it was a big board, you know, the size of a tabletop, about that thick, locked on your neck, which of course meant you couldn't like feed yourself in any way, so you had to rely on charity and mercy from the people you encountered. Oh, we skipped a rack, and now we're at a gibbet cage. How are we doing at time? Anyone? 10 minutes. All right, I'm going to go through these faster. This is a gambler's rosary, which you would be forced to wear. This is a German postcard of somebody wearing the gambler's rosary. Note the scale. These are 3 witches being burned alive. These are the dastardly tools of the witch pricker. If you're not familiar with a witch pricker, somebody like Matthew Hopkins, who was a witchfinder general in England during the reign of King James I of England and 50 Scotland. Basically, they got paid by how many witches they had. And it was believed that if they stabbed you with a needle, and they found a spot on your body where if they stabbed you with a needle and it didn't hurt, that must have been where the devil had entered, and therefore you were a witch. So they had, there were some of these known to exist, these retractable point witch prickers, so that it didn't matter who you stabbed or how or where, of course it wouldn't have hurt. So, oh, there's another one, and there's another one, and how many do you owe me for there? I found a whole bunch. This is a witch trial examination. Here we see a woman who, having been accused of witchcraft, stands before the legal and church authorities to be examined and questioned. Once stripped naked, she will be subjected to various tortures until the authorities elicit from her the confessions they desire. Depicted here, you can see the finger pillory, branding irons, fiddle, flail, restraints, pincers, and even part of a rack on the right. The title of this 19th century engraving is, and I quote, "You are going to be tortured so much the sun will shine through your body." This image depicts the burning of several heretics in Schwarzenberg, Switzerland, as part of an auto da fe. Oh, there's Matthew Hopkins, Witchfinder General, right there at the top. And some of his more successful cases where he got, you know, the accused witch on the right to name all of her imps and familiars, when in fact she was an herbalist. Yeah. A jump kick? Oh, no, he's hung up by his wrists.
Oh, he looked like he was doing the...
No, this is a woodcut by Nicholas Storr from about 1540. The guy on the left-hand side of the image is having his tongue cut out, while another is being whipped by 2 torturers in the background while enduring the torture of the pulling, the squassation. But focus your attention on the right-hand figures. Here we see a flogging with the broom, which was essentially a bundle of sticks. It is impossible to guess how many lashes this poor victim has received, but they must have been considerable, as the skin on his back has been entirely flayed away, and he is no longer capable of standing. Can you make that out on the right? See his ribs? Stock and pillory, burning a hole through his tongue. The Salem arrest, this illustration by Howard Pyle, better known for pirates. Which chair with shin press, as you see. Now we're into the 18th and 19th century, and of course, that leads us to guillotine. Guillotine, during the 18th and 19th century, it was the age of reform in so many ways. But what they were trying to do was make their public executions quick and painless, hence the invention of the guillotine. This was supposed to be far more merciful than anything that had gone before. And that also made it very clinical and detached. It was a hands-off operation. There's a big difference between being a headsman swinging an axe and a blindfolded man pulling a lever. Have you ever cut anything with a knife? Obviously. When you imagine you're chopping vegetables and you have a knife, you can't hit it square. You have to move across it. You slice. The diagonal blade allowed it to slice as it moved in a straight path down. It went across the neck while falling, so thereby facilitating the cut. Restraints. Okay, in this section, I'm just going to run through some of these. This is the color section from the book. If you have any questions about what something is, let me know, because we're running out of time. I'm just going to scroll through this. Those are some branks, similar to the Scold's bridle we saw earlier. They were locked under, you've heard of the man in the iron mask? That was inspired by this idea. These were common punishments. You can see in the middle there's a shrewish woman being locked in a kind of, I don't know, dragon-looking mask of some sort, and pilloried in the town square with a sign on her chest that says "Husdrake," house dragon. These are neck catchers. Yeah, that's how you lead somebody to their execution. They can't really get away. You can't tell how beautifully engraved those are, but they are very beautifully engraved. And one of the things that struck me so much in doing this research is that some of these items are incredibly elaborate. I mean, like the brazen bowl, you know? If you want to kill somebody, even if you want to cook now, building this big bronze bowl, and then it's incredibly elaborate. Those are another example. Head cages, finger pillories, thumb crushers, and restraints, gibbets, and iron cages. Chastity belt. Common misconception about the chastity belt. By the way, this is the only photograph of anybody in the book. Anybody being tortured is a drawing. She's not being tortured. She's an artist model in the 19th century, modeling the chastity belt, as you do. Better picture of them. There's more chastity belts. The top right and bottom right are chastity belts. The objects on the left are breast rippers, as used on St. Agatha. There's a good version of a chastity belt. Very elaborate. It is now generally thought among historians that chastity belts were not a punishment inflicted on women by men, that they were a precaution put on women by themselves, such as at the time of toward the end of a siege, when your town is about to be overrun by the enemy, or you're in a convent and you're under attack. Okay, they're going to kill me, but at least I'll go to heaven pure, or whatever. And it's widely believed, except there are references, and I don't know if this is just myth, but there are references in English literature to the device Northern Italian men lock on their women when they leave. So maybe, again, that was just a xenophobic thing. Scrolling through. Oh, this little thing, top right.
Yeah.
Put it in the mouth, crank it open. This thing bottom right, most people recognize because they watched the Da Vinci Code. It's a Silis belt. It's a self-mortification device. Used the whole idea of the flagellants, the self-mortification, came about during the 14th century during the Black Death. The various monastic orders said, God must hate us because this thing is killing everybody. We need to atone for the sins of mankind, so they would beat themselves to suffer for their neighbor's sake, et cetera, et cetera. Same with this very spiky vest on the left. It's also a self-mortification. Oh, this is the torture of the barrel. This is bad. Yeah, in this, victim is stripped naked, forced into this cask with hundreds of inward-facing spikes. The cask would then be sealed and rolled down a hill, or around town, or even thrown in the ocean, to be tossed and rolled and thrown by the waves until the tide came back in. Sorry?
The fairy tale, the goose girl?
Yes.
That's what the princess does.
I think I got a better picture of that. Yeah. I don't know if you can make it out, but this is another version of the saw. I know that's not a very clear projection of that. Yeah. That one. That's the picture. Like I said, some of these devices were incredibly elaborate. In other cases, you take something very, very commonplace, like a standard keyman crosscut saw, and put it to a fairly horrible use. In this case, bear in mind that he is not dead until you reach his lungs, heart, or brain. And since he's hanging upside down, all the blood is running to his head, thereby maintaining his consciousness. That means that's all right. My hand is the bottom. All right, the whole thing has to rotate this way. Okay, so do that. There. And what's happening, the guy on the ground has been staked out and his entrails are being winched up around that windlass.
As depicted euphemistically in Braveheart.
Was it? I know it was. There's a reference to it because of a certain martyrdom in the film The Cell.
Yeah.
Where they kind of reproduced this idea. Yeah, more tortures. And that's a good example. That's the garrote chair, the Spanish garrote. Which these pictures, they're clear on here. I don't know why they're not clear on there. There we go. Iron Maiden, Spiky Dash. The cradle. Top left cradle that is about 7 foot long enough for a full-grown person. It's full of spikes, and they would put you in there, and then they would rock you. But what I find particularly curious about that cradle is it has a spiked pillow. Why put in a pillow? Yeah.
Insult to injury?
It's a big cushioned leather pillow with spikes coming out, metal spikes.
Yeah.
Insult to injury.
There's so much more to say, but we're out of time, so, shrews fiddles. Noisemakers fifes, punishment for bad musicians. The passer. Yeah, you don't want to sit on that. It's, I imagine that's rather uncomfortable. All right, we are kind of out of time, yes? Yep. My next thing is actually to go across the hallway and break a pork with anybody who wants to come and have a chat. If you know how to read, I recommend these books.
Where can we find those books?
At my table, or Amazon, or Barnes & Noble, or places that sell books.